We are now joined by James Edward, the high school sports editor for the Deseret News. Here we are, another season. A lot of storylines to keep track of, a lot of changes. First of all, the playoff RPI. Before we talk about the pros and cons, can you explain how this playoff RPI is supposed to work?
Well, that's the big question. I think a lot of coaches maybe don't even know.
They can't wait to hear your response.
Yeah, but really, I think 40% of what you do impacts your RPI, but 60% depends on what the other teams you play against, how that impacts your RPI. So a good schedule is going to determine kind of ultimately how teams are seeded in the playoffs. And really, it's your opponent's schedule, but your opponent's schedule. So teams in strong regions, they will get a benefit in the RPI rankings, where teams from weaker regions, they could have a really good year, but still get a lower seed in the playoffs. So a lot of coaches feel there might be some kinks to work out, but that's kind of the gist of it. You really only can control 40% of your own playoff destiny at this point.
So as you're talking to coaches, what are some of the concerns that they may have with this?
I mean, that's a little bit of that. I think the biggest concern from talking to coaches is regions don't really mean anything anymore. You can win a region championship, but be a 9 seed. I mean, it really just depends. So there's no emphasis on winning your region. It's really about just, almost like college football, you got to win every game. Winning as many games as you can is the ultimate key. So this first year, coaches didn't have a chance to schedule, knowing what the RPI was going to be like. Next year, coaches will know before they ever do any schedule, and they'll have a year under their belt. So it'll be interesting. But I think that's the biggest concern that overall coaches expressed is it doesn't matter if I win a region championship anymore, and coaches think that should matter. Playing for a region should be the most important thing, because coaches always say 3 goals. Make the playoffs, win a region championship, and then try to do well in the playoffs. But one of those goals in many ways is taken away.
Realignment. We have new realignment this year. Always changes. I thought UHSA did a great job this year. There's a lot of rivalries renewed as you look across the state. What's the biggest thing that sticks out to you about this latest realignment?
Well, how good is Region 4? Probably is the biggest. I mean, your championship teams in 6A last year and your championship teams in 5A last year, they're all in the same region now. So that region is stacked. Some people will say, well, the RPI, that's fine, because they'll still could be in opposite sides of the bracket and they could still meet up. And that may be true, but it's really interesting how with Orem bumping up to 5A, I know a lot of people in 4A feel good about that now, because it's kind of, maybe a more competitive thing for the rest of the teams there, because Orem was so dominant in the last couple of years. And really without Corner Canyon and Skyridge in 5A, I think it makes everything more competitive. I think 6A was fine. It was very, at the top was very competitive, but I think the classifications below, I think it makes it more competitive, maybe from top to the middle ground.
So you have 5A and 4A champion moving up. That's going to be interesting to watch how those teams compete. No more 1A this year, so that was a big change. Yeah, that's a big change, especially for those lower end schools that had a hard time competing in 1A. You wonder if they're going how are they going to compete in 2A? And really, Altamont has already dropped football. They didn't have the numbers to compete, and you wonder if those fringe kids, maybe they decided not to compete. So it'll be interesting to see how that translates going forward if some of those programs, I'd hate to see any more fall off. I think the ones that stayed, really, it's pretty strong in the communities, but we'll have to see. Losing 55-0 every Friday night, that's old. Fun. Perfect segue into the next topic, state championship favorites. The coaches have voted in the preseason poll. Who are the teams predicted to win in all the classifications?
The kind of projected number 1 in the coaches' rankings, and a lot of times these are just based on what happened the previous year, but it is an interesting thing with the realignment year. So Lone Peak got the most votes in 6A, they're the defending champs. Corner Canyon got the second most votes, and they were the 5A champs. No surprise that in 5A, your preseason favorite is Orem, the way they're bumping up. Dixie, they are the favorite in 4A. They were in the championship last year, lost to Orem. In 3A, really, there wasn't a clear-cut favorite, but Morgan did edge out. I believe it was Summit Academy and Juan Diego is the favorite there. And in 2A, Milford actually got just a few more votes than Beaver. So the 1A champ jumped up to 2A, but they're really deep and loaded again this year, and they kind of edged out Beaver for the preseason rankings.
What I do like about this year, though, is in each classification, there's not a overwhelming powerhouse that's the overwhelming favorite. I think there's a lot of parity in high school football this year in the state of Utah. All right, Mr. Football, the most distinguished award in high school football. You give it out every year. You know, in college football, they have watch lists.
Yeah.
And we do that before the year. I thought it would be fun to do a Mr. Football watch list. So do you have a watch list for us for Mr. Football?
A little bit of a watch list. I was kind of going through it. And it's interesting because I was kind of working on some of our preseason stories, and there's so much defensive depth in the state this year. I mean, last year there was so much offensive talent. This year, for whatever reason, I think it cycles through. There's so much defensive talent, and it's hard for a defensive player to get the player of the year. So this year, I mean, it's like, God, we might have a defensive Mr. Football. I mean, you got Noah Sewell. You know, I know he plays offense for Orem too, but I mean, he's one of the top linebackers in the entire country.
He's now a 5-star.
Yeah, exactly. So he's, I mean, I don't have a number 1 or 2 or whatever, but he's very near the top of the list. Obviously, a great player for Orem. Another defensive player, Corner Canyon, Van Fillinger, recent Texas commit. I mean, just an incredible defensive end. And also on Corner Canyon, Cole Hagan, their quarterback. I mean, Eric Kerr is an offensive mastermind.
Yes.
His quarterbacks, going back 12 years, have always been juggernauts. So you get a senior quarterback and his offense with a year of experience under his belt. He's got to be someone that you consider. He might be the top offensive guy on that list. I mean, so much of them are defensive guys. I'm trying to think who else was on there. We talked briefly. Was it, oh, the offensive lineman actually for Viewmont.
Yeah, Alex Harrison.
Alex Harrison, really strong kid. He's someone, I mean, it's hard for an offensive lineman to win, but it's not unprecedented. Tooney Canuch at Bingham High School, that was about 10 years ago. He won it. So those are some kids that are maybe at that top of the list, but I think it's an interesting year because there's no like Jalen Warren coming back after rushing for 2,000 yards, or Puka Nacua, where it's like, yeah, he's clearly the guy.
As long as he stays healthy, he's going to win this award.
We lost so many offensive stars from last year, and the guys back are defensive guys, so I think that makes it kind of an interesting year in that regard.
A couple of other guys on the watch list, Nate Ritchie, Mason Fallsliv of Skyview, who may be the best all-around athlete in the state, both basketball and football. And a guy that's new to the state, Xavier Carlton, of Juan Diego, playing in 3A. He may not get some of the attention that the big schools get, but coming out of the state of California is one of the top defensive ends in the country, so that'll be another player to watch.
Yeah, and the Nate Ritchie, you mentioned him. I mean, he was such a key part of what Lone Peak did last year. It's tough for a safety to win Mr. Football, but he added 5 special teams touchdowns last year.
That's incredible.
And in big games. I mean, he helped them win some big games. So, you know, he'll be a dynamic athlete, and he'll be a key part of what they do this year.
You guys have been hard at work all month. Tell people what you've been up to, how many previews you have, and where they can find it.
Well, DeseretNews.com. Go there. What are we up to? 108 high schools? Well, Altamont dropped, so 107 high schools. So there's 107 team previews on DeseretNews.com right now, and 16 regions, so 16 region previews. Myself and about 6 other high school writers for the Deseret News, we've just been bouncing around the state, talking to coaches. It's a fun time of year for everyone. It's fun for the coaches. There's a lot of optimism, and it's kind of fun for us because we kind of get to document that optimism before week 1, and then the results start to tell the story.
I've already been busy digging into it. Can't wait to get this season started. James, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Enjoy the season.
All right, you too.